Greetings, brethren, and welcome to another presentation from upa7.org. Today we're going to pick up a really critical topic. We're going to address a paradox amongst Davidians to define or understand the difference between a storehouse or storehouses and, quote, headquarters. This is a huge issue of controversy and confusion, and we want to shed some light or clarity to the issue. We're going to ask the questions like, how do they apply today? What do we need to have to advance the work? Do we need a storehouse? Do we need a headquarters? Which is it? Why is there so much confusion? Well, we're going to document this, and so we can have understanding and move forward and address the issue, how to best advance the shepherd's rod message today. This is something that many Davidians are searching for answers, but are confused. They hear a lot of conflicting information. So by the end of this presentation, we assure you that we will provide a clear-cut answer coming right from the Golden Bowl. So let us begin with this prayer thought, and it's a statement from Testimonies, Volume 6, page 364 and 365. It reads, "The dealings of God with his people should be often repeated. How frequently were the waymarks set up by the Lord in his dealings with ancient Israel? Lest they should forget the history of the past, he commanded Moses to frame these events into song that parents might teach them to their children. They were to gather up memorials and to lay them up in sight. Special pains were taken to preserve them, that when the children should inquire concerning these things, the whole story might be repeated. Thus the providential dealings and the marked goodness and mercy of God in his care and deliverance of his people were kept in mind. We are exhorted to call to remembrance the former days, in which, after ye were illuminated, you endured a great flight of afflictions." Hebrews 10, verse 32. "For his people in this generation, the Lord has wrought as a wonder-working God." The past history of the cause of God needs to be oft brought before the people, young and old. We need often to recount God's goodness and to praise him for his wonderful works. This is a great counsel, brethren, is to understand what it is that God would have us to do today. We need to look at the past history and see how God has wrought in behalf of his people. And the history we want to really focus in on today is recent history, say after the death of Brother Howder, because that's the history that's muddied and confused. And so we want to bring some clarity here that we can indeed claim that God is leading his people even today, no less than he did as in former days. So with this prayer thought, please take time to pray and meditate for yourself and to trust that God will lead us unto all truth as we begin. So what are some of the questions that we want to address in more detail? Actually, this list of questions were submitted to us a couple years ago by some brethren in the Philippines, and it's kind of a long list, but these are some of the things that they're wrestling with. Since Brother Howder is dead, how will his followers continue to manage the GADSDA association if there are no bylaws? Good question. So is it possible? And the answer is yes. So this is one of the things they're wrestling with. Next, today some Davidian associations, for example, Mount Dale and Waco, nominate and elect their officers or leaders. But you, that is us at UPA7, has said that they have no legal right to do this. Can you please explain? And certainly we'll be happy to do that in this presentation. Next, how can we nominate Executive Council officers? Is voting or electing not part of nominating? So we're going to see what the Rod says about this. How do we come up with a legitimate Executive Council, not a counterfeit one? Next, do you mean to say that we can have an Executive Council officers now, but who's the one who will appoint if the prophet is dead? Because the antitypical Joshua, Brother Howder, will continue his leadership in the kingdom? So the setting up of officers, will it be in the kingdom? So how do we contrast the time now versus, say, in the future, once we set up the gospel headquarters in Palestine? Big difference there. Next question they had: is it true that the First Amendment of the United States, that the churches are not taxed by the government? Is this IRS the fulfillment of antitype? So it's a question about the staff called the 501c3 status. And this is something many Davidians have no idea the dangers of this. So that's another one. And then finally, how is the Confederacy binding at the present time? According to 2TG41, pages 18 to 20, who are these antitype? Now, who's fulfilling the antitypical Confederacy? And you might be shocked. Most Davidians think one thing, but the truth is they're actually part of the Confederacy. So we're going to address some of these in our presentation here and give clarity to the issue. So what is a current dilemma facing many Davidians? There's a lot going on in this year, 2022. One of the areas is the decline in health of Don Adair. He's up in his 90s now, and he's been the sole head of the Salem Association for over 47 years, ever since he got voted in as vice president in 1973. So right now there's a big power struggle as to who's going to take over the assets of the association, and they're considerable. We're talking land, money, books, property, and so forth. So two factions have arisen, neither of which really understand the nature of God's storehouse and what it should be doing today to reach 22+ million Seventh-day Adventists around the world. The focus tends to be a kind of a power struggle, setting up rival executive councils and then finding or renovating property to house their headquarters, because the place where Don Adair's been for many years has fallen in great decay. It burned down in 2010, and so the residue there is like I say, it's very dilapidated, needs a lot of work. So that's a big struggle going on right now. So that's one dilemma facing, quote, Salem Davidians. The controversy over the unauthorized new codes, which has been going on for almost 2 decades, has resulted in a split, with the Mountaindale Association giving rise to the pre-11th hour ministry. So this split is ongoing as present. So far, the preliminary focus has been on appointing a new board comprised of 7 members. They don't want to call themselves an executive council. They're just saying it's a board. And then they're worried about gathering tithes to support Bible workers who had prior appointments with Mountaindale. The tragedy is that they don't really have any real understanding of what constitutes God's storehouse and how it should be working today to advance the shepherd's rod message. Because when people ask them about publishing the literature, they will deflect to a certain brother in Colombia publishing Spanish translations. And so who authorized them to do that? And the question is, well, who's going to publish the original in English? And they really don't have an answer to that yet. So this is a dilemma for those people. And another faction, there are scattered groups of Davidians who have in the past supported New Waco Association. That's the one that reorganized there under Norman Archer in 1991. So they continue to question many of the things being taught and practiced at their headquarters and wondering if they should continue to support them as the presumed, quote, storehouse. Issues include teaching from the new unauthorized new codes, changes in the rod chart artwork, and other corrupted publications that come out of Waco. So all of these things are happening simultaneously. So God's allowing all this agitation, and perhaps it's a means to awaken people that, is there a remedy to this? And the answer is yes. So let's analyze this in more detail. So in order to do this, let's go back, as the prayer thought is look at some historical background and then walk us up to the present status. The status is divided and confused, but what is the remedy? And there is one if we look closely. So here's some interesting facts about the establishment of the rod message that really are important. They communicate to us an example that's important to understand. Well, in 1930, Universal Publishing Association, or UPA for short, was started in Los Angeles, California. Between 1930 and 1935, Shepherd's Rod Volumes 1 and 2, along with tracts numbers 1 to 4, were published there in California. Now notice, there's no Mount Carmel Center, there's no GADSDA. It's just the establishment of the publishing work. That was the foundation. 1935, the Storehouse Headquarters moves to Waco, Texas, and this is recorded in Tract 13, second edition, page 45. Then, in 1937, the first bylaws were written for the Shepherd's Rod Seventh-day Adventist. And note, this is a full 7 years after the publication of the original rod began as a storehouse under the name Universal Publishing Association, which started, as I pointed out before, in Los Angeles, California in 1930. So the storehouse pre-existed any bylaws or any higher level of organization for a whole 7 years. This is a really important fact, is that a storehouse can exist independent of bylaws, associations, and executive councils. That's how it started. On February 12, 1943, the bylaws were established as published in the Leviticus of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, pages 8 to 10. They were applicable for the true headquarters that existed from that date, 1943, to 1955, when the association was renamed the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, or GADSDA. So GADSDA didn't come into existence until 13 years after the establishment of Universal Publishing Association. So this idea that when groups break up and splinter, you immediately have to set up an association or you immediately have to have bylaws isn't in harmony with the actual facts of history. Is it possible that we could continue Universal Publishing without bylaws, without an executive council? And the answer is yes, because history shows us the example. So let's look at this illustration to what I call the rise and fall of Mount Carmel Center under Brother Houda from 1930 to 1962. So it all starts over there on the left. In 1930, in Los Angeles, California, was the beginning of UPA, Universal Publishing Association. In 1931, as recorded in Tract 13, the storehouse moved from the General Conference to Universal Publishing Association. So that's recorded, the first tithes were received. Later, in 1935, they moved the storehouse from California to Waco, Texas. 1937, they formed the first bylaws in the Shepherd's Rod Seventh-day Adventist Association. So the association was 7 years after the UPA started. And then, as I pointed out in the previous slide, GADSDA in the Leviticus arose in 1943, 13 years after UPA was started. As we move along, 1954, with the publication of Symbolic Code, Volume 10, Number 2, the Shepherd's Rod message was complete. All the numbered tracts, miscellaneous tracts, answer books, timely greetings, Volume 1, Volume 2, were all done. And then the next year, February, Brother Houda dies in 1955. So what happens after that? Well, Florence Houda, as we've thoroughly documented in prior videos, well known, hijacked her, usurped her, took over the association, removed the office of president, and had herself voted in as vice president, that corrupted leadership model. So she began to take, God basically gave her and her unauthorized counsel about 7 years, and they systematically began to dismantle the message. Now, 57, the old property of Old Mount Carmel Center was completely sold off. The order to begin the sell-off was by God's direction through Brother Houda in 10 Symbolic Code number 2. That started in 1954. That complete sell-off of those original 375 acres was, like I say, completed, and that's reported in Florence Houteff New Codes in 1957. 1961, I should add the date here, the infamous knockout blow, prediction of Ezekiel 9 in this, April of 1959. Of course, that came and passed. 1961, faithful Davidians, they called themselves 100% Rod only, began to oppose Florence Houteff and Ben Roden's bogus branch, and they called for reorganization. So there was a reorganization to get back to what? The original message, the original publications, to resurrect and preserve UPA. And then in 62, Florence Houteff and her council resign and denounce the message and turn over the assets. They used the money from the sell-off of the old Mount Carmel to buy this new Mount Carmel, which later ended up in the hands of a Texas lawyer in the court battles in Texas in the 60s and ended up in the hands of Ben Roden and then later David Koresh. And this is the place that got burned out in 1993. So all of the work of Florence Houteff was to defile and attempt to destroy the message. But thank God he had faithful Davidians in the green arrow there that restored the original publications in 1961 and reorganized. So that is the key. So in the next graphic, or slide, we're going to look at the bylaws for that association that existed under Brother Houteff. So establishing the bylaws was only for a fully operational and complete GADSDA headquarters that performs all of the constituent parts, which includes the following. And this is all recorded in the ROD. First and foremost, the publishing of all the original ROD literature and study charts. Second, a school for children. Third, rest home to care for the elderly. Fourth, an infirmary to take care of people that were sick. Fifth, agriculture enterprises. In an old Mount Carmel, it's a peach orchard, a dairy herd, for example. Next, Levitical Institute. That is the ministerial training program. Next, the Bank of Palestina, their own means, their own currency, their own self-supporting community, financial community. And then finally, a number of buildings to support the work, everything from the publishing work, the office building, cafeterias, dormitories for people to live, dairy barns, and even a publishing house. So all of that was where comprised GADSDA and the appropriate bylaws. So you cannot claim to be a GADSDA today unless you've got all of these components. And there isn't anybody that claims that title that's doing all of this. Okay, Waco, Mount Dale, none of them are. So if you would like some links for further study, now we've got this all detailed in much greater detail. We have a YouTube channel, Universal Publishing Association, and we have a video entitled Universal Publishing, Its Rise and Progress from 1930 up until 2012. Also, a detailed video on the history of Old Mount Carmel Center from 1930 to 55, documenting all this progressive development under the 25 years of Brother Houteff. And then the scattering time after Brother Houteff died. This is a crucial video to understand the period that we're living today. We don't have a prophet to guide us, and except for false ones that he warned us about, but a true living prophet. So how is it that the work is going to progress? So this is a key video. So we encourage you to look at those if you're not familiar with them at this time. Now, let's look at a timeline for the ROD message and understand where these various factions arise. Because a lot of Davidians, they come into the message and they discover all of these different groups. So the question is, where'd they come from? And then, most importantly, who's right and who's wrong? Who preserved the original message and who are all these counterfeits? So this timeline summarizes that. So once again, 1930, Universal Publishing started in Los Angeles. 1935, the movement of the headquarters, Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas. 1955, Brother Houteff died. And immediately, the first usurper arose in Ben Roden's bogus branch. And fragments of that movement continue on to this day in the whole lineage of false doctrines. Now, we're not documenting that, but they are still branch fragments with us today. In the previous slide, we talked about Florence Houteff taking over and her renegade council. And so in 1962, they renounced the message. The old New Mount Carmel ended. So 1962. But thank God, God had faithful Davidians that recognized this and began to oppose not only Florence, but Rhoden's branch, and they reorganized in the green arrow pointing up 1961. Faithful Davidians, they called themselves 100% rod-only Davidians. They reorganized, and their primary focus was to get back to the original literature, the original message, and then to train Bible workers. That was their mandate. And believe it or not, that's still the mandate that applies today. That we can do, and we don't need a living porter or prophet to tell us. The instructions are already in the rod. But the devil doesn't stand idly by. In the next year, 1962, there was a split between Brother Warden, who kept alive the original message in Vista, California, and then M.J. Bingham claims that we'd moved into the Bashan pasture. So this was the origin of the Bashan pasture that's now located in Exeter, Missouri. So that's another faction there. 1970, the brethren in Vista, California decided to relocate eastward to Salem, South Carolina, where there was a rest home that was developed in Brother Houteff's day in the 1940s. Brother Houteff visited there, so they reorganized. They moved the headquarters there. There was a session, and this is all recorded, 1970. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is that Don Adair went with Bingham in the 1960s and was a pupil, a disciple under him. And then later, about 1968, he broke away from Bashan and joined back up with the Vista group and became part of Salem. He was actually the session chair during that 1970 session. And then later, this led to the next split. Don Adair got himself voted in as vice president in 1973 through a coup d'etat, essentially, and has been there in control ever since. And he hijacked the symbolic code and used that as an instrument to introduce his various false doctrines and personal life details. And so this created a controversy and a split. And what resulted was the faithful reorganized back in Yucaipa under the 1961 charter, and that's the origin of Yucaipa. And then Don Adair continued on with his headquarters, Mount Carmel Center, Tomasi, South Carolina, and that's the one right now is in the process of breaking up. So that's the origin of Don Adair as in the counterfeit Tomasi Association. Now, Yucaipa was publishing the original literature, and what a lot of people don't realize is that Yucaipa, that under Salem, Don Adair had a group of brethren that were cast out that were studying up in New York under Anthony Hibbert. And so they broke off. They were cast out by Don Adair in 1982, and they discovered these older Davidians in Yucaipa, and they merged together in 1986, and that became the origin of the Mountaindale Association, who kept the original literature alive. Shortly thereafter, the devil didn't stand idly by. There was a rebellion started by Norman Archer and others, and there was a split, and that became the basis of what we call New Waco under Norman Archer, and they exist on a small portion of the original property that was part of Old Mount Carmel Center. So they're in the middle of the city of Waco right now. So that's a key date, 1991. And then 2006, UPA7.org arose out of necessity because Mount Dale by that time was no longer publishing the original literature. So much like in the past, God had to use somebody to resurrect and preserve the integrity of UPA, the original publishing work. And so that's where UPA7.org started to meet a need. Initially, at the time, it was in the Philippines, but we came to recognize later it was a worldwide problem. The dearth or lack of original literature to feed the flock in countries around the world. So all of this is in more detail. If you check out our website, yparish.org, we have a 6-part series called the Storehouse, the History of God's Storehouse from Genesis to Revelation, and we published this in 2010. So if you're not familiar, please check that out. You'll learn a lot. It's an excellent series. Now, let's look at a major misconception, the distinction between a storehouse and headquarters, because many Davidians are obsessed with, oh, we got to have a headquarters, we got to have a headquarters. And I said, says who? It's just an assumption, but they don't know the difference between them. So let's define that. What is a storehouse in its most fundamental sense? From the Shepherd's Rod perspective, a storehouse is the place where the original Shepherd's Rod publications are printed, comparable to that of the true GADSDA or Davidian storehouse during the period from 1930 to 1937. Remember that there was no association, no bylaws for that first 7 years. All that they published was the original literature. So in that period, under the leadership of Brother Haddoff, and that storehouse is where they kept the meat, and the meat is the present truth literature. And in turn, that was brought to the house of God to be distributed throughout Mother or Laodicea as the leaves of autumn without cost or obligation. So this is the critical thing. A storehouse in its most essential element is the place, irregardless of location, wherever the original literature is published. And we're talking about the photographic reproduction of the actual printed tracts that Brother Haddoff published. We have no instruction to compile them, change them in any way, shape, or form. So that is fundamental. I ask many Davidians, can you define for me what the storehouse is? And they will come up with all kinds of crazy ideas. Oh, it's the ministry of Jimmy Kokori. And I'm like, what? Jimmy Kokori is not a storehouse. He does not publish the original literature. He's a hireling. He's a paid Bible worker for Waco. Okay, and we're going to do a video on him soon to expose who he really is. But these ideas that some people have are clearly unfounded. And so we got to go by definitions what the Rod message teaches us. The storehouse is where the original Shepherd's Rod literature comes from. Now let's contrast that with a headquarters. What's a headquarters? The headquarters is the main office building where administrative duties of all branches or departments of the government, a company, a religious organization, or an association are managed, directed, and ruled by appointed or higher-ranking officials, such as the executive officers of the true General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists in the period from 1943 to 55. That's the example. It's almost like a type, if you will. But that was the only true GADSDA, is under the direction of the prophet himself from 1943 to his death, 1955. So therein you had that organizational structure. So what did it look like? Well, the only legitimate executive council that's ever existed is this one. And this is recorded in two places, Fundamental Beliefs, page 16, and also in Recording Un-Adventist Activities, page 20. So the executive officers were a president, V.T. Haddoff, who God called and chose, then his cabinet, who he chose himself, Vice President E.T. Wilson, Secretary Mrs. Florence Haddoff, Treasurer Mrs. Sophia Hermanson, and then the total executive council, in addition to them, included other members, M.J. Bingham, H.D. Ward, and Mrs. Florence Haddoff, and Mrs. G.R. or Genevieve Bingham, Bingham's lawful first wife. So the executive council, comprised of 7, was chosen and selected by the president himself. It wasn't by voting and nominating. We're going to look at that here in a minute. So this is the only authorized executive council. Every other executive council that has existed after the death of Brother Haddoff is unauthorized. It has no legal standing according to the bylaws of the Leviticus. So links for further study. We have a website, and we've gone into this in great detail because brethren have asked us years ago, and they're still confused about, well, what's the storehouse and all of this? And so we've got plenty of, if you just go to that website and search storehouse, you'll find out, here's a study, storehouse versus headquarters. What's the difference and where are they located today? So that's a blog post, 2015. We have why has God had to move his storehouse in the past? And the principles by which God moves the storehouse, it's a fact. Why does he do it? And how do we identify this movement? So these are crucial concepts to get down. So that website, yparish.org, has that all that very thoroughly documented. We're just summarizing here. So please go there if you're not familiar or if you want to learn more. In terms of headquarters, we have to analyze this. It's really in 3 sections. First, the headquarters for the Seventh-day Adventist Church that resides in Tacoma Park, and then now it's moved to a suburb close by, Silver Springs, Maryland. That's the General Conference. In the domain of the Two-Horned Beast, 8-track, page 24. Okay, from the time they moved from Battle Creek, 1903, up until Ezekiel 9. So that headquarters will exist until God removes the ancient men from the house. And a lot of Davidians go to 8-track, page 24, and they think they're talking about GADSDA and Mount Carmel Center. And the answer is no. Go read it for yourself. This is a massive piece of disinformation and confusion coming from Salem that's been perpetuated by Mount Dale and Waco. They think they're all obsessed that the headquarters has to be in the United States. And I'm like, headquarters of what? Go read the reference. 8-track 24. It's talking about the church headquarters, Silver Springs, Maryland, not the publishing work. Amazing how just one fact can get so many people diverted off into the ditch. The next phase, from 1943 to 1955, was the second true headquarters, was the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, or GADSDA, under the tenure of Brother Victor T. Houteff, as specified in the Leviticus of DSDA, published in 1943. So this is the only headquarters that operated 100% compliance with the 1943 Leviticus. Everything else that you've seen, for example, Mount Dale, Waco, and Salem, are all counterfeit. We have videos on YouTube channel to document it, that their bylaws are a total counterfeit. They don't follow the original. They're way off. So if you're not familiar with that, please check the link in the description box below where you can examine Waco and Mount Dale's bylaws compared to the original, the 1943 Leviticus. And finally, the third phase of headquarters will be after Ezekiel 9. The third and last headquarters for the gospel will be established in Palestine, and you can find that in Answer Book number 2, page 48. This is after purification. So how do we understand this period from the death of Brother Houteff up until Ezekiel 9? That's where most Davidians get confused, and here's a way to address that. So the presumption is we need an executive council. Do we? So here's the question coming from that we had from the Philippines. I'm a bit confused. Today, some S.D.A. associations, for example, Mount Dale and Waco, nominate and elect their officers or leaders, but you have said that they have no legal right to do this. Can you please explain? And I've said, certainly, we'll be happy to explain. The answer, yes, what we have said is correct. It is not, repeat, not right for true Davidians to vote the Executive Council officers at any time, as it is political in nature, following the example of the Seventh-day Adventist Mother Organization as exposed in 8-track, page 48, which reads, now, read carefully. Current Davidian associations follow the world. They're not following the rod. And here's the proof. Let's read this. 8-track, page 47, 48 says, time has already demonstrated that the Seventh-day Adventist organization is fulfilling the type, preferring to what? Incorporate and to elect officers by the people's vote. They have thereby manifested that they have cared not so much to please God by being a peculiar people, as he would have them to be, as they have to please themselves by being as much as possible like the other denominations. Just as in Saul's time, people wanted to be like the nations around about them. And although chosen by the people, yet the General Conference officers were nevertheless accepted by God to be the rulers over his people now, as Saul was anciently. Just as he betrayed his trust, however, by disobeying the word of God as spoken to him by the prophet Samuel, so the present church organization, the ancient men before the house, have, says the prophet to the church today, betrayed their trust. Testimonies, Volume 5, page 211. For a more ample treatment of the subject of organization, see our organizational manual. Of course, the Davidian organizational manual is the Leviticus. And as I mentioned prior, that we have proven irrefutably that these associations, Mountaindale and Waco, are following the example of the Mother Church, choosing to what? Incorporate with the state as 501 IRS, 501c3s, and then are mandated to have a body of officers, and they elect him by popular vote, nominate and elect. This is the example set down by Florence Houteff. This is how she usurped and took over. So her corrupted leadership model, no president but a vice president instead, is the example that Waco and Mountaindale and Salem are all following. Can you not see it? They're following the world. They're not following the Leviticus. And we've documented this very thoroughly. Their bylaws are man-made. They're a mixture of truth and error. So this is a huge dilemma. President or vice president, prophet or not. Many Davidians are clamming for an office, and they'll certainly have a horde to follow them. So they're wanting to have a porter or a prophet like Bashan, a president like Bashan, or they want to have a vice president. Okay? And they're all confused. They don't understand Leviticus. For example, page 5, it says of the bylaws, Article 4, Section 1A, the regular officers of this association shall be a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. That's pretty plain. So why is it that Mountaindale and Waco and Salem don't have a president? And you'll hear them, blah, 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 Brother Houteff was the last president, but now we're going to have a vice president. You know who they're following? They're not following Leviticus. They're following Florence Houteff, because she's the one that removed the office of president and had herself installed by vote as vice president. Facts are facts, whether they're believed or not. Amazing. Now, the only people that attempt to follow this is Bashan. They say, well, we have a president, Porter. The problem is, who chose their president? Bingham chose himself. Okay, God didn't choose him. So there's a problem, but they at least can claim that they're following Leviticus closer than the other ones, but the problem is their president is a fraud as well. And then in the next page, Leviticus page 6, section 2, it says the president, this is his job description, shall, as typed in Exodus chapter 4 and in Numbers chapter 16, verses 12 to 25 and 32, act as chairman of the Executive Council, as chief administrator of the affairs of the association, and as a worker and minister in the general interest of the association. So there's nothing in this job description that says it has to be a prophet. But if you look at Mountaindale and Waco, their vice president, and Salem as well, are doing all the job that a president would do. You see why we have so much confusion? It doesn't make any sense. And the answer is because it's all unauthorized. It's man-appointed. They're trying to follow Florence Houteff. They worship her and her leadership model, not the original Rod. So what's the difference between electing versus appointing officers? Brother Houteff, this is fundamental to understand. Brother Houteff selected the GADSDA executive officer members. They were not voted in by the majority. They were not elected. This is an irrefutable fact. Just like a leader of a country can appoint his own, he's voted in by the people, but once he's there, he appoints his cabinet. Okay, the cabinet isn't voted in member by member. So Brother Houteff was chosen and appointed by God, and he chose his own executive council when the time came to have that level of organizational structure. They were not elected by popular vote. So the question becomes, how can we have a president now that Brother Houteff is dead? The only authority comes from Leviticus, Article 4, Section 1b. We don't have any. So, however, being that we, Davidians, are in the scattering time after the shepherd has been smitten in 1955 up until Ezekiel 9, as predicted in Zechariah 13, verse 7, then calling and choosing the next president will come about in the kingdom, to answer book page 48. The future gospel headquarters after God removes all the tares in our midst. So attempting to set up a president or some leadership structure following a vice president in the place of the president is unauthorized. The future gospel headquarters will have the theocracy direct rule by God. There will be the rulers and the under-rulers, Brother Houteff will resume his work once again. So how do we operate in this scattering period? That's the crucial question. So at this time, the Leviticus will become, in the kingdom, will become fully operational once again, just like it was during the period of Brother Houteff. So people today are attempting to apply the Leviticus in the scattering time, and it doesn't work. That's why there's so much confusion. So how can we understand the scattering time? Well, it covers a period of Carmel pasture that began in 1930 and that will end in Ezekiel 9. So there is a difference between Mount Carmel Center and Carmel pasture. Patient doesn't know this, and that's where you always ask him, what's the difference between Carmel pasture and Mount Carmel Center? They're two different things. So Old Mount Carmel Center, under Brother Houteff, was a physical geographical location, and you can look that up. Mount Carmel Training Center, page 5, one symbolic code, number 14, page 5, solitary in the woods. So that existed, okay. So that existed from 1935 to 1955. After Brother Houteff died, as we shown before, God reorganized the work in 1961 in Vista, and that preserved the original literature. They moved to Salem in 1970. In 1974, they merged with a group that had been kicked out by Salem, and 1974 they split, and Yucaipa arose to keep the original literature alive. That group later merged with a group that had been kicked out by Salem, and they formed the Mount Dale in 1986. They kept the original literature alive, facsimile, until around 2000 they began to typeset it and change it. And then in 2006, out of necessity, UPA7.org arose to address the crucial need of literature not only in the Philippines but around the world. And we don't make any claim to have a headquarters in the U.S., because that's false, based on a misunderstanding, 8-track 24, but that there should be publishing houses worldwide in the scattering period. So multiple publishing houses to reach Laodicea, based on 7 testimony, page 140. We'll look at that in a second. And it called also, according to Spirit of Prophecy, councils on living to get out of the cities, get out into the country. So how else are we going to reach 22 million 70 Adventists? Well, multiple publishing houses around the world is the way to do it, and we'll demonstrate that shortly. So this leads us up to Ezekiel 9. After the sealing and purification, in the kingdom period, that's when the Leviticus will become fully operational. So this concept of the scattering time is crucial. We got a whole video on this topic alone. Check the link in the description box below if you're not familiar with that. So what's the difference between a Universal Publishing Association versus Mount Carmel Center? They're two different things. Mount Carmel Center under Brother Houteff included UPA, but UPA was the foundation. Okay, so should a Davidian group call itself Mount Carmel Center today? And the answer is no. They're not authorized to. If you're going to claim to be, that's why we have so much confusion. Which Mount Carmel? The one in Salem? The one in Mount Dale? The one in New York? Or the one in Waco? So they're all claiming to be something that they are not. If you're going to claim to be Mount Carmel Center, that's what was liquidated and sold off, that property. But that's different than Carmel Pasture. Carmel Pasture is still alive. So to be a Mount Carmel Center, you would have to do everything that Brother Houteff did. And nobody, I repeat, nobody is doing everything that Brother Houteff did at Old Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas. So what, in essence, is the work of Universal Publishing? That's the key. Let's focus on UPA. That's the key. That's what started the work, and that's what will finish it. Remember, we got a video called The Hands of Zerubbabel, Elijah's Helpers. That's us. And the hands of Zerubbabel, Brother Houteff says, will finish the work. Okay, the work that Brother Houteff started in 1930, and that involves publishing literature. So the essential work of Universal Publishing is to publish the original Rod literature, the tract literature, identical to what Brother Houteff did, and scatter as leaves of autumn around the Adventist world through multiple publishing houses. We don't need a Mount Carmel Center today. God is calling the 144,000 to be leaders, not followers. The problem with many Davidians is that they want to follow an unauthorized, man-made Executive Council that tries to rule the world. We're not going to submit to that. We follow the voice of God through the original rod. So since Brother Houteff is dead, how will his followers continue to manage the Davidian Association if there are no bylaws? Answer: Brother Victor Houteff may be dead, but the original rod message from God through him is still alive to equip every candidate for the 144,000 for their journey to the kingdom. Any interested party worldwide has the privilege to print the original Shepherd's Rod literature through the ministry at upa7.org without cost or obligation, wherever they may be, so that storehouses can be set up locally in every corner of the earth to fulfill the siege recorded in Ezekiel 4 for the hastening of that long-awaited kingdom. Our goal is 1,000 publishing houses worldwide. You think, wow, that's impossible. No, it isn't. Without a vision, the people perish. If there were 1,000 publishing houses publishing the rod literature by the hundreds in their areas, we could reach 22 million Seventh-day Adventists. No problem. We're called to be heads, not tails. With Christ, using the Holy Bible, the Spirit Prophecy, and the original Shepherd's Rod, each candidate, that's us, for the 144,000, is to become a leader and can manage the work of God, even alone, just as Elijah thought he was all alone. Please bear in mind that the candidates for the 144,000 must strive to be perfect leaders, not followers, heads, not tails, before they're sealed, or they cannot escape the execution of Ezekiel 9. The remnant of her seed are the 144,000 against whom the dragon makes war. The war is waged against them because they are earthly leaders and founders of the movement. Shepherd's Rod, Volume 2, page 265 and 266. Do you see that? The 144,000 are leaders. How can you lead out today? Really simple. Set up a publishing house. Whether it's you by yourself, God will watch over you, or a group of people, 3 of you, 7 of you, or we have one case in the South Pacific, the islands of Vanuatu, there's almost 300 of them. And they're hopping islands, they're taking the literature to other South Pacific islands. They've got contacts and moving that literature. They're talking about setting up another publishing house to meet that demand. So this is how we can lead out, not waiting for somebody to tell us what to do, not sitting, spending all your time on Facebook, but witnessing in behalf of the message, actually doing something. So there should be multiple publishing houses prior to Ezekiel 9. This is irrefutable. The amazing irony is there are Davidians that don't believe this. Well, I guess we have a problem with unbelief, but here it is right here, 7 Testimony, page 140. Actually, read the whole section. It starts on page 138 up to page 150. Ellen White calls it our publishing work. And yes, it had an application in her day, but if you read this key sentence, it says, in a large degree through our publishing houses, plural, not one, not singular, not located in the U.S., but publishing houses, is to be accomplished the work of that other angel who comes down from heaven with great power and who lightens the earth with his glory. Now think about this, brethren. Analyze this. The other angel that comes down from heaven that joins the 3 to give it power and force is the 4th angel of Revelation 18. And anybody who studies the rod knows that that is the Shepherd's Rod message, the judgment of the living, the judgment of that first begins in the house of God that began in 1930. This could not be fulfilled in Ellen White's day, even though they set up Adventist publishing houses around the world. That's true. That was an example. But today, the perfect fulfillment of this counsel is through the publishing of the original Shepherd's Rod message around the world. How is you going to reach these 22 million Seventh-day Adventists? You can't do it from one publishing house in the U.S. It's impossible. I mean, Waco, you can boast of your gigantic publishing houses, but you'll never meet the quota to reach those 22 million. It's much easier to do it on a local level. It's irrefutable. Why is it that people don't believe this? I guess we can call it the mystery of iniquity, unbelief in the testimonies. Sad thing. So what is it that we should be publishing? Well, this is the original from 1930-54, Shepherd's Rod, Volume 1 and 2. And we are publishing these 2 books in South Africa and Vanuatu, the first to publish the original Volume 1 and 2 in their original format, not compiled together, outside the United States. So that, coupled with all of the 75 pieces of individual tract literature, which is tracts numbers 1 to 15, 7 miscellaneous tracts, Timely Greetings Volume 1, Timely Greetings Volume 2, 5 answer books, and symbolic codes. We're talking the original O codes, Volume 1, number 1 to Volume 10, number 2. That, brethren, is what we should be publishing, and it can be done. We're doing it as we speak. So what does it take? This is so simple. The simple means Christ will be taking the reins in his own hand. TM 299. A small group of individuals can establish an original Shepherd's Rod publishing house for about $2,500 US. We just set up publishing houses this year in 2022 in the country of Malawi, and the cost was just under $2,500. We're talking complete cost: travel, printing equipment, computer, food, and everything. This 2 weeks ago, we established a publishing house. This is end of September 2022 in Zambia. We've been praying for this for a long time. There's a lot of confusion in that country because of Lennox Sam and Wacos and Mount Dales and Bastions and all this. But we set up a fully functional publishing house there for $2,785. So, brethren, it can be done. And they're publishing the original literature by the basketful. And believe me, they're very happy. They're very excited. They are on fire. Now, let's compare this, the simplicity of it, and the power. I mean, even a household can come up with that kind of money. You compare that with, say, the expenses for a Bible worker. Mount Dale pays their current Bible workers about $1,600 a month. That's not a lot of money. That is poverty wage. But you look at the commitment, the amount of tithe it would take to support that Bible worker for 1 year, that's almost $20,000 US. And what can that one Bible worker do? They could do something. But how are they going to reach 22 million Adventists who are going to trace their first conviction to the reading of their publications? They're really not publishing anything. They're maybe giving Bible studies. But look at that, $20,000 US. Do you know how many publishing houses that is? It's 8 publishing houses. What is the impact of one Bible worker at one location versus 8 publishing houses in countries around the world? There's no comparison. The impact is, not even in the same ballpark. 8 publishing houses publishing hundreds of literature weekly or monthly can canvas way more Seventh-day Adventists with the original message. So think about these things. Proper instruction and counsel will be provided how to set up the treasury work for the collection and disbursement of tithes and offerings. We would like to address a humongous lie that is repeated over and over, that we are teaching people to, quote, pocket the tithes and do whatever they want with that. That is a bold-faced lie. We have never done that. We teach the brethren how to gather their tithes locally and use it to set up a publishing house. And when they're ready, they can use it to publish the literature. Not until then. The only reason people tell that lie is to try to keep you from advancing God's work through God's appointed way. The irony is that these associations, such as Mount Dale and Waco, go over to the African countries and steal, rob them of all their tithe, take it back to the U.S. to pay their full-time Bible workers, right? To be treated like kings and go around the world and be entertained and entertaining, right? Meanwhile, they leave them, these poor brethren in Africa, with nothing but a stone. We don't work that way. We don't take one dime of the tithe money from another country. Go ask them. God blesses us. We're self-supporting Bible workers. We're not full-time paid Bible workers. We're not greedy dogs eating up the vineyard. So we create our own tithe, and we use it to help them set up their own publishing. The money goes the opposite direction. And once they get established, then that local group can gather their tithes and offerings and use it to continue to advance the work. It's really simple. It works. And it's fully authorized and vindicated in the Bible, Spirit Prophecy, and and Shepherd's Rod. So identifying qualified self-supporting Bible workers who can be trained to carry out the publishing work is essential. How do you recognize them? Well, one, they're already at work. They don't sit around and complain, but they are actively engaged in trying to advance this work, and then they read and study for themselves, and they understand the history, they understand the controversial doctrines, and they're willing, most important, they're willing to put their hands to the work. And it becomes obvious who God is calling. Self-supporting layman Bible workers, not greedy dog ministers looking for a full-time paid Bible position. So fully qualified workers will train and dedicate each new publishing house. This is the miracle of it. We don't have to travel from the U.S. to every country to do this. I traveled to Africa one time and trained up brethren, and now they are going and to the next country to train them, and so it multiplies. It's really simple. It's much more efficient, much more cost-effective. And everybody has a part to play, the parts of the body. So it's not a group of unauthorized executive council in the U.S. dictating what goes and what doesn't. That lording over God's heritage is unauthorized. God's not in it. So these brethren are happy. They're zealous. They're on fire. They're excited for a reason, because God is using them to have a part in the work. So once established, the publishing house's first priority is to provide each supporting member a complete set of original Rod tract literature. That's 75 pieces for their own studies. That's one thing that we discovered in these countries. I would always ask, what kind of literature do you have? And I'm telling you, no one had a complete set of literature. Some of the older brethren that had been there for 30 years, back from Ukaipa days, a couple of them had almost complete sets of literature, but the newer ones had fragments, maybe 10 pieces, and not even, and some of that not even original. So you don't understand how excited they were when we began to feed them and get their own literature. I mean, it was like a feeding frenzy. They were so excited. And naturally, wouldn't you be? Shouldn't you be praising God for this great work? That they can have their own literature to do their own studies, and then in turn publish multiple copies to go out and go to camp meetings and share with Seventh-day Adventists? Isn't that how it should work? Makes sense, doesn't it? So let's get away from these knockout-blown GADSDAs who follow Florence Howe by destroying the office of president and installing a vice president to lead, unauthorized. Executive Council's officers are elected by popular vote. They're not chosen by God's appointed agent. So it's all counterfeit. They follow Florence Howe. They incorporate with the state as 501c3 organizations. That's a whole issue. They talk about, say you're not a confederacy. They're following the new codes, but they're the ones that are confederating. Check the link in the description box below. We have links to our website and videos discussing this dangerous trap for these organizations. It will be the means that they will be shut down, just like Mother. So what do? They publish and teach unauthorized new codes, volume 10, number 7, to volume 13, it's numbers 11 and 12. This is a huge issue. You, in clean conscience, cannot continue to support these blown out Mount Dale and Waco as they perpetuate the errors of the new codes. And they enshrine them like Mount Dale just did in their bylaws. The only safe and sane procedure is to separate, divorce them, and advance towards the kingdom. Set up your own publishing house in your country. That's what's needed. We need them in Mexico, in Latin America, Jamaica, Australia, Thailand, all over. They also claim, without authority, to beat Mount Carmel Center. They're not doing the work of the original. They fail to publish the original literature. It's all counterfeited. The artwork has been changed. We've documented that in prior videos. They use man-altered study charts, some worse than others. And they teach doctrines heterodox to the original Shepherd's Rod message, some worse than others. So, brethren, why are you hanging on to this corrupted idol? God's asking you, set it aside and get back to the platform, the original. and not be fooled by the sleight of men. The scripture reads in Ephesians 4:14, that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. Don't fall victim to these cunning men who will tell you fables to keep you entrapped and suck your tithe money out of you to enrich themselves, the greedy dogs of Ezekiel 34. And we're also warned in Hebrews 6:26 and 27, for if we sin willfully after we have received a knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries. Brethren, if you continue to uphold and defend and support these unauthorized, man-appointed executive councils and associations and all their defiled, corrupted new code doctrines, God will hold you accountable. Thus saith the Lord. So flee from the judgment that is coming. So what can we conclude? In the scattering time of Ezekiel 13, verse 7, Davidians should establish storehouses around the world to reach Mother according to 7T 140. It's that simple. There's no need today to follow GADSDA headquarters, their man-appointed executive councils, their man-made bylaws, and their misapplied or unauthorized names, such as Mount Carmel Center. The 144,000, which were all called to strive to be the number, are to be trained as leaders, not followers. So not only do we teach people how to set up the publishing, but the follow-up, just like in the 61 mandate, is to train Bible workers. And we're working on that right now. We will have an online school of prophets if you want Bible worker training. We've been doing this for a while, but if you are desiring to learn how to become a leader, we can help you. We have all of the curriculum, all of the content, and we can get you started on the path that God would have you. God's people are not to be incorporated with the state as 501c3 organizations. Major problem of all the associations in the U.S. And you're to return your tithe to God's true storehouses, not some man-controlled association. It's really that simple. Seek and you shall find. This is Wonderful Counsel, Symbolic Code, Volume 2, page 9, paragraph 1. And this is what helped me when I got kicked out of Salem and wondered, Lord, where is your storehouse? And this gave me comfort. And it reads, our only concern should be to find out where his storehouse and then faithfully deposit his money there. And if it is his storehouse, he will, without doubt, take care of his own. But if he does not care for the storehouse which you think is his, then either your conception of a storehouse is incorrect, or else he's moved it to another place. Seek and you shall find. And that's exactly what I did. I went looking for it. And so God led me to Mountaindale. And I said, yeah, that was the storehouse for a period of time, but guess what? It's moved. It moved in 2005. And Mountaindale split then. So if you want to know where God's storehouse is today, go looking and pray and fast. God will show you. It's to set up publishing houses around the world. So if you're in the country of Zambia, well, we can direct you to those brethren, and you can support that storehouse right now. And you can get directly active in printing and distributing that literature as the leaves of autumn. So you have no more excuse. So that concludes our study. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to contact us anytime. We're upa7.org. Here's our email, our phone number. You can text us, you can call us, or you can connect with us through this number on WhatsApp, social media. We're primarily on WhatsApp. We don't use Facebook. Or better yet, visit our website, yparish.org. Leave a comment on our blog post on the study of God's storehouse. We got several of them there. And may God bless you in your search for truth as for hidden treasure, and to cease from all these men and their unauthorized executive councils whose breath is in their nostrils. Now, I want to show you where there are publishing houses right now. Here are the contacts. You can take a screenshot of this, but we have UPA7 in Republic of South Africa. There's their email and phone. Zimbabwe, United States, the islands of Vanuatu, Zambia, email, phone number, and Malawi. We have websites, yparish.org, upa7.org. We have upa7.co.za, that's in South Africa. We have video channels on YouTube, several of those. We're connected on alternative media platforms, MeWe, Telegram, and WhatsApp. So, brethren, we're going to be aggressively promoting this concept because it works. You can't stop it. This is God moving upon his people. We're not centralized under the control of any one man or an executive council. We're controlled by the Holy Spirit. And these brethren are being empowered. They're on fire. And this concept is going to expand. We're going to go to 10, 20, 50, 100. You can't stop it. So please, consider these things. Pray about it and contact us. We will get you going by the grace of God. May God richly bless you as you search for truth as for hidden treasure. Godspeed.